Imagine spending 11 years of your life, like over 4,000 days, just painstakingly writing a book.
Yeah, that's a massive commitment.
Right. And you are working in total secret, constantly looking over your shoulder. And, well, you know that when you finally finish, after a full decade of labor, you will only be allowed to print 200 copies.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. Furthermore, if the wrong person finds one of those 200 copies, you could go to jail. So today we are unpacking why someone would ever take on that kind of risk. Welcome to this Missions Connect deep dive.
It is a really profound premise to start with, especially when we contrast it with how frictionless our own access to information is. Like, we don't wait for texts, and we certainly don't have to hide them.
Exactly, which is exactly why this deep dive is designed as a tool for you, the listener. It's here to prepare your mind and your heart for the upcoming week. Because in the Missions Connect app, our mission is very specific. We focus on mega frontier groups. We are talking about the most unreached and the most highly strategic people groups in the entire world. And to engage with them, you really have to understand the reality they live in.
Right, and that requires moving past, surface level assumptions. We really need to look at the actual mechanics of what is happening on the ground in these regions so that your engagement is deeply informed by the actual facts.
And the facts today come from our focus material for the week, which is the weekly preview. Now, this is a Bible-based and missions-focused devotional and prayer app, which is a ministry of assistingtoobey.com. I always love delivering our tagline because it really sets the agenda for everything we do here.
Oh, absolutely.
Blessing the nations through prayer, knowledge, and obedience.
I love that sequence. It's so intentional because the deep knowledge we are going to explore today, well, that provides the fuel for the prayer, and that prayer ultimately drives obedience.
Definitely. So today's journey takes us to East Asia. We are specifically looking at the realities inside China and Japan. And the weekly preview draws this fascinating historical parallel right at the beginning. It points us to the early church in Acts 12, verse 24.
Yeah, and the context of Acts 12 is totally critical to understand that parallel. I mean, at that moment in the text, the Apostle James has just been executed by the state.
Right.
And Peter is locked in a prison cell. So the early church is facing this coordinated systemic pressure that's literally designed to completely silence the gospel. But then Luke, the author, makes this definitive statement.
Acts 12, verse 24 simply says, "But the word of God continued to spread and flourish." It's just stated as a matter of immovable fact, despite, the political reality around them.
Which perfectly mirrors the situation in East Asia right now. The pressure from both state regulations and these deep-seated cultural forces is immense, yet the work is still moving forward.
So if we want to understand how that is practically happening, we're going to look at three interconnected fronts of this week's global prayer journey. We'll examine the grinding mechanics of Bible translation, the hidden lives of missionary kids, and the systemic spiritual resistance pushing back against the gospel.
And to really understand the whole picture, we have to recognize that these aren't just three separate, isolated issues. They are three symptoms of the exact same underlying reality.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's jump into that first front, the physical text. The weekly preview highlights this staggering project happening right now in China's Yunnan Province.
Right, Yunnan.
Currently, there are 7 ethnic minority translation teams working on complete scriptures in languages like Yi, Lisu, Jingpo, Lahu, Wiwa, Miao, and Zaiwa. And the statistics on the Zaiwa bilingual Bible are just jarring. It was completed in November 2024.
Yeah.
And it took 11 years of continuous work, yielding an initial printing of just 200 copies.
The time frame alone tells you how complex the environment really is.
Wait, I want to push back on this a little bit.
Yep.
If the state is actively monitoring religious materials, why spend 11 years making physical books at all? Wouldn't a secure, encrypted PDF sent over a messaging app be infinitely safer, faster, and cheaper to distribute in 2026? Why risk everything for 200 paper copies?
That is a very logical question, especially for someone living in the West. But it fundamentally misunderstands the nature of modern surveillance in this region.
How so?
Well, digital distribution leaves a permanent, traceable footprint. We are talking about an environment with pervasive WeChat monitoring, and algorithms actively scanning digital files for religious keywords.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and police routinely conducting physical phone checks on public transit. A digital file can be tracked to the sender, the receiver, and honestly, everyone in their network.
So a physical book is actually safer because it's entirely disconnected from the grid.
Precisely. Once a physical book is smuggled out of a printing facility, it is essentially dumb technology. It can't be hacked remotely. It can't be tracked via GPS. It can be buried under a floorboard or hidden in a sack of grain. It requires actual physical discovery to be compromised. But producing that physical book is grueling, mostly because of the revised regulations China introduced in May 2025.
Okay, yes. According to the Weekly Preview, those regulations explicitly prohibit foreigners from producing or distributing Bibles without prior state approval.
Which means the traditional model of a well-funded foreign missionary organization coming in, setting up a printing press, and distributing texts, that's completely gone.
Wow.
The entirety of the burden, the translation, formatting, secret printing, and quiet distribution, it now falls squarely on the shoulders of national workers.
And those national workers are operating under an incredibly dense layer of observation. I mean, the Weekly Preview details that in Yunnan Province alone, there are more than 12,000 government grid officers monitoring villages and reporting religious activity.
Yeah, 12,000.
We really need to define what a grid officer actually is, because it sounds like a generic term for a police officer, but it's much more structural than that.
It is. A grid management system divides a neighborhood or a rural village into literal geographic blocks or grids. And the state assigns specific citizens, these grid officers, to actively monitor their designated block.
So they are just local residents.
Yes, their job is to observe daily life. They note who visits a specific house, what anomalous packages are delivered, and if there are unusual gatherings. It essentially crowdsources surveillance down to the hyperlocal, neighbor-watching neighbor level.
That is intense. So if a translation team is meeting to discuss how to translate a complex theological concept into the Zaiwa language, they aren't just hiding from, like, a central intelligence agency.
No, not at all.
They are hiding from the person living 3 doors down, who is legally mandated to report a group of people frequently meeting on a Tuesday night.
That is their daily reality. And if we zoom out to look at the macro level, the scale of the remaining need is just massive. Across East Asia, there are 251 language groups that still lack complete scripture.
That's a huge number.
It really is. The Weekly Preview specifically mentions the Uyghur community. Their New Testament is complete, but the Uyghur Old Testament is still painstakingly in progress.
And that is happening for millions of speakers in a region that researchers identify as having some of the most intense, technologically advanced surveillance on the planet.
Exactly.
The text also notes a statistic that completely reframes the logistics of faith in these regions. It says researchers estimate that roughly half of Chinese Christians in rural and ethnic minority communities do not have a personal Bible.
Yeah, and when half of a booming, multi-generational faith community cannot physically hold the foundational text of their faith, the transmission of that faith relies entirely on oral tradition and in communal memory.
Right. So if the physical text is locked down, and the state is aggressively monitoring what enters the village, what happens to the families trying to pass this faith down to the next generation, because the restrictions don't stop at the local printing press.
They definitely do not.
The Weekly Preview indicates they are pushing forcefully into the living room.
Which brings us to the unique vulnerabilities of missionary kids and the children of national believers. In China, there is a strict legal wall. It is legally prohibited for children under the age 18 to attend religious services or receive formal religious instruction at a church.
But the state recently escalated this beyond the church building, right?
Yeah.
Because the text notes an internal directive from September 2025 issued by China's Central United Front Work Department.
Yes, it did. That directive specifically extended the restriction into family life. It explicitly stated that parents must not organize home-based religious instruction.
Wait, how does a state possibly enforce what a parent tells their child over dinner? I mean, the logistics of monitoring a private home seem impossible, even with grid officers.
Well, the enforcement mechanism outlined in the directive relies on the educational system. It actually instructed schools to encourage children to report home-based religious instruction.
Are you serious?
Yes. A teacher might ask a class what their parents taught them over the weekend, or if they read any special books together. A 7-year-old making a totally innocent comment about a Bible story can trigger a full investigation into the family.
Wait, so we are talking about parents having to raise their kids in the faith entirely in secret. knowing a simple comment to a classmate could lead to legal consequences.
Absolutely. In fact, Human Rights Watch actually flagged these measures in April 2026, pointing out that this functions as a severe violation of international human rights standards. The psychological weight of that on a family dynamic is just
I
immense.
can't even imagine. But the weekly preview contrasts this legal pressure in China with a very different kind of barrier in Japan.
Right. In Japan, the wall isn't legal, it is deeply cultural. The Christian population in Japan is less than 1%.
Wow, less than 1%. It's kind of like playing a game where everyone else is using a different rule book. From what the weekly preview describes, growing up as a Christian kid in Japan means you are completely immersed in Shinto and Buddhist rituals at school and at home, making the kid an outsider in their own culture.
That's exactly it. So while a child in Japan doesn't face the threat of a grid officer reporting their family, they face this profound, relentless social isolation. They are an outsider in their own culture every single day.
That sounds incredibly lonely.
It is. Syncretism, which is the merging of Shinto and Buddhist practices into daily Japanese life, is the baseline. If you don't participate, you disrupt the social harmony.
So to protect their children from that isolation, or simply to provide them with a supportive community, many families have to make agonizing choices. The text mentions families frequently sending their kids to international schools, or even sending them back to their home countries.
Which necessitates separating the family unit for months at a time. The emotional and developmental cost of that separation is incredibly high. But the weekly preview makes a vital distinction here. It points out that what these children need most isn't simply to carry the heavy burden of their parents' missionary calling. They desperately need the freedom to have a personal encounter with Christ and develop their own resilient faith.
This is where specific organizations are stepping into the gap, right? The preview highlights groups like TCK Training, which provides targeted resources for caregivers of third culture kids.
Yes, they do great work.
It also mentions OMF's TCK Advocates, who specialize in supporting these children across East Asia, helping them navigate this massive intersection of faith, isolation, and identity.
That support is absolutely critical because when you look at the legal surveillance in China and the cultural isolation in Japan, these aren't just arbitrary local policies or random cultural quirks.
Right.
They are symptoms of a much larger systemic spiritual resistance.
Which leads us directly to the third front detailed in the weekly preview, spiritual warfare. And there's a specific term here that we need to define for the listener because it's the engine driving a lot of this. What exactly is synicization?
Based on the documentation provided in the text, synicization is not simply a policy of making things, more Chinese culturally. It is a strict political policy requiring Chinese Christians to actively subordinate the lordship of Christ to the ultimate authority of the Communist Party.
Why does the state care about the internal theology of a church? Like, what is the practical, physical goal of a policy like that inside a sanctuary?
The goal is absolute visual and psychological hierarchy. Practically, synicization requires churches to display national flags and prominently hang portraits of President Xi Jinping inside the worship space.
Inside the church.
Inside the church. It mandates that seminaries include Xi Jinping thought as a core part of their theological curriculum. Furthermore, state officials actively monitor sermons to ensure the message never challenges state authority.
So by placing the portrait of the political leader next to or above the altar, they are ensuring that even in a believer's most private, sacred moment of worship, the state physically looms over them.
Exactly.
It essentially erases the boundary between religious devotion and political allegiance.
Right. The state recognizes that a group of people whose ultimate allegiance is to an unseen, higher authority is inherently threatening to a system that demands total control. And there is a severe real-world cost for resisting this alignment.
Yeah, we aren't just talking about abstract theological debates here. The weekly preview highlights a major coordinated crackdown that took place in October 2025 at Zion Church. Now, this was one of China's largest independent Protestant congregations.
It was, and during that event, nearly 30 pastors and staff members were simultaneously detained. The church's founder, Pastor Ezra Jin Mingri, was formally arrested.
And what was the charge?
The official charge leveled against him was illegally using information networks.
Let's look at the tactical fallout of that. I mean, if a megachurch has 30 of its leaders removed overnight, how does it functionally survive the very next Sunday?
Well, it forces an immediate radical decentralization. The large, visible congregation has to fracture into dozens of tiny, underground house churches just to continue operating.
That makes sense.
It drives the church off the grid, which makes it harder for the state to control, but also much harder for the believers to organize, train leaders, and support each other.
So if China's spiritual stronghold is state control, Japan's is deeply woven into the family tree, right?
Yes, I totally agree with that. In Japan, the primary spiritual stronghold is ancestor veneration. It's a foundational element of Japanese family structure. Every home typically has a butsudan, a Buddhist family altar, where daily respect is paid to deceased relatives.
So in that context, choosing to convert to Christianity isn't viewed as just adopting a new set of personal beliefs.
Not at all. Because of the ancestral contract, choosing Christ is experienced by the family as a total, disrespectful rejection of your heritage. If you refuse to participate in the rituals honoring your deceased grandparents because of your new faith, well, the family perceives that you are actively condemning your ancestors.
That's a huge burden,
It is a deeply personal betrayal in their eyes.
which explains a truly staggering statistic provided in the weekly preview. It notes that approximately 90% of Japanese converts eventually return to their former practices.
The sheer weight of that number, 90%, tells you this is not about a lack of intellectual belief in the gospel. People do not walk away at a 90% rate simply because they change their minds.
Right, there has to be more to it.
They return to their former practices because the sustained, overwhelming pressure from their family, combined with the daily friction of religious syncretism woven into the national calendar, it simply becomes too much to bear.
They are basically sourced into an agonizing choice. Keep your new faith or keep your family. It's an impossible position.
And this is precisely why the weekly preview frames all of this information under the lens of Ephesians 6, verse 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. The grid officers in Yunnan and the cultural expectations in Tokyo are just the physical manifestations of a spiritual reality.
Yeah. If you were listening to this right now, processing all of this on your commute or maybe while you work, it can feel incredibly heavy.
It really can.
We have looked at translation teams dodging surveillance for 11 years to print 200 Bibles. We've unpacked the reality of parents whispering Bible stories to their children in fear of state informants and teenagers navigating total cultural isolation.
Yeah.
We have seen pastors arrested and new believers forced to choose between Christ and their own parents.
It is a really heavy reality to confront. But the purpose of the Missions Connect app is not to overwhelm you with the impossibility of the task. The purpose is to surgically inform your intercession, because despite these massive hurdles, you, the listener, you are not powerless in this equation.
Exactly. You have distinct agency in this fight. The weekly preview issues a very specific, actionable challenge for you this week. It asks you to take up the 9-minute daily prayer challenge.
And the structure of it is really simple. 3 minutes per focus. You spend 3 minutes praying for the stamina and safety of the Bible translation teams. You dedicate 3 minutes to the protection and mental health of the missionary kids. And you spend 3 minutes praying directly against the spiritual strongholds of synicization in China and ancestor veneration in Japan.
The challenge here is to change your posture. We are asking you to become a missionary on your knees, become a prayer missionary, because the remarkable truth is that your intercession from wherever you are right now bypasses the grid officers in Yunnan Province.
It really does.
It reaches directly into the detention facilities holding Pastor Ezra Jin Mingri in Beijing, and it enters those Japanese family living rooms.
It is your opportunity to actively stand with the 251 language groups still waiting for complete scripture. It is how you provide a shield for a missionary kid trying to build their identity in a culture that fundamentally does not understand them.
So here is your immediate action step. I encourage you to download the web-based app right now. You can do that by clicking the link in the description of this deep dive or by simply visiting assistingtoobey.com. Engage in the daily devotionals, read the hyper-specific prayer points, and join this global movement of intercession.
And as you engage with the app, ensure you stay connected with the broader community participating alongside you.
Yes, we invite you to follow Assisting to Obey social media channels. You can find them on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Staying connected there ensures that this mission remains front and center in your daily life, long after this deep dive ends.
Because, as we established at the very beginning by looking at Acts 12, verse 24, no matter what regulations the state enforces or what pressures the culture dictates, the Word of God continues to spread and flourish. But that spread relies on the faithful, persistent work and the informed prayer of believers around the world.
We started today by talking about how easily we access information. I mean, the device in your pocket can summon almost any text in human history in under a second. You don't have to wait a decade for a translation, and you certainly don't have to hide the screen from your neighbors.
It's a profound, often overlooked privilege.
So as you head into this week's prayer journey, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder. If a Zaiwa believer was willing to wait an entire generation for a physical Bible they have to read in hiding, and a Japanese believer risks losing their entire family just to follow Christ, well, what does that mean for how you engage with your own freedom to worship and pray today?
That is the crucial question to carry with you this week.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Head over to assisting2obey.com, take up the 9-minute challenge, become a prayer missionary, and we will meet you right back here next time.
So, you want a faith that actually matters, right? You want to make a difference in the world, to see the gospel changing lives, to know that your walk with God and His Word is impacting more than just your own life. Yeah, you want your life to count for the nations. But here's the thing. You're busy, maybe overwhelmed. You're pulled in 20 different directions. And even though you want to engage in missions and the Great Commission, you don't always know what to pray for, what's happening globally, or what your next step should be. The desire to obey is there, but the pathway isn't always clear. Let the Missions Connect app show you the way. Every day, you'll get a missions-focused devotional with a simple, practical action step and an option to share with the Missions Connect community. Every week, you get 3 strategic prayer focuses with fresh daily text and audio prayers, so you're never guessing about what to pray for. And when you're ready, you'll find opportunities to actually get involved in God's global work. Everything in the devotional and prayer section is free forever, but we offer you the opportunity to try the premium version for 15 days. You want to impact the nations with the gospel? With Missions Connect, now you can. Missions Connect, helping you bless the nations through prayer, knowledge, and obedience. A ministry of assisting2obey.com.